Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this month's Construction Cast. A bit of a special edition this month. And we've got lots of people coming in through the door as we talk, so that's always nice. Almost 200 people, I think, signed up in the end for this. So we're looking forward to seeing everyone this morning. So thank you. Do say hello if you want in the chat, as people sometimes do, and do ask questions in the Q&A section, because we'll hopefully have time for a few questions at the end. So I say it's a special one this month because we've got the Mr. and Mr. Adjudication with us. I think it's probably the quickest way to describe them, but probably not the best way to describe them. So thank you very much to Matt Molloy and Jonathan Cope from MCMS for joining us this morning. You may have heard, some people heard, that they'd launched a book. So we heard they'd launched a book. So we thought we'd perhaps say hello and have a chat with them and see what they've got to say. Not just about books, because books can be a little bit tiresome. I think probably a bit bored of talking about books. So we're going to talk about lots of other things as well. So Annie's going to introduce Jonathan. I'm going to introduce Matt, and then we'll get straight into it. So Annie, do you want to do your bit?
Morning, everyone, and welcome. You've got both of us on today, which is a little bit unusual, but it's quite nice to have both of our faces. And of course, we've got Jonathan Cope here. Jonathan is an experienced dispute resolver who's been appointed on over 400 construction disputes. He acts as an expert witness and is the former chair of the Society of Construction Law and the RICS Dispute Resolution Professionals Group. He's also, as well as being the author of the book that they're going to talk about today, he's the author of the current edition of the RICS guidance notes for surveyors acting as adjudicator. And I'm sure most of you already know who Jonathan is, so we probably don't need to introduce him that much.
Okay, and so I'm going to introduce Matt. So Matt Molloy, another director at MCMS. So I think, and I could be wrong, but I think I first met Matt Molloy around about 2000 or 2001 at one of the events that Keith Pickavants ran down in Bromley in Kent. I think that's where I first came across you. I'm pretty sure you came to one of those.
No, that's right. Yeah, no, I remember it. Yeah, it was like a school or a hotel.
But yeah, that's right. Yeah, bit of both actually. It's a hotel that was designed for education, so it was quite a handy place. Anyway, so that was interesting. So it's been a long time. MCMS at the time would have been about 4 years old, and quite a lot has changed over the years. Matt's probably best known now for his work as an adjudicator and dispute resolver. He's a senior warden at the Worshipful Company of Arbitrators, an external examiner for Leeds Beckett University, arbitrator, adjudicator, director of MCMS, as we've said, the father of a very talented musician who performs occasionally at our events in London. And he's also a triathlete, and we've just literally found out that he fell off his bike once. But anyway, we'll skip over that and go straight into the questions. So thank you both for joining us. Jonathan, to start with, how did you both get into the world of construction law, and when did you first start working together, and how did it all come about?
Well, it'll probably come as maybe not a surprise to the lawyers online. The surveyors, when we're at university, we do actually get taught some law, quite a bit of law, and I always found it really interesting, and that continued when I went into practice as a surveyor. And I decided I would join what was then called the London Junior branch of the RICS. And I got involved with the CPD, and that's where I met Matt. And it's probably around late 90s, early 2000s. And we were responsible for organising the construction law CPD. And so we get along people like Simon Tolson, Tony Bingham, people like that to talk about construction law topics. And that sort of invigorated the fire, if you know what I mean, in me in terms of the legal side of things. And obviously got to know Matt well, and we went out to lunch once, and I said, I want to do what you do. So I did the graduate diploma in law, and then the bar course and the CIR qualifications and these sorts of things. And that's really how I got into it. And then got onto a number of the panels of adjudicators and arbitrators, and it went from there. In terms of when we started to work together, well, I joined MCMS in 2004. But before that, we'd sort of spent a year. We went out every month for dinner. It's just a good excuse to go out for dinner, really, to talk about how it would work. It was probably the longest sort of interview process, but it was a really great way of working out, well, what do we want to do with the business and that sort of thing. So, yeah, that's really how I got into it and how we started working together, Stuart.
Amazing. And you've been going so long. I mean, I was in primary school, I think, when you guys started up. But you're really successful. And Stuart and I work with lots of small businesses, and we work with lots of startups, and we see a lot of businesses that look like they'll work great together with two directors who are both extremely experienced and so on, but sometimes they fall apart. And you guys have made it all this time. So what's the secret to setting up a successful partnership?
Yeah, I mean, it's it. I mean, Johnny's already alluded to those meetings, and I think that was a key. Yeah, it was quite a shock for me when Johnny said, "Oh, I'd like to do what you do." And I remember sort of looking over my shoulder and realizing that he was talking to me, and I was like, "Okay, no, you're actually quite serious about this." And so at that stage, I'd had my brother, who's been working with me, but doing more commercial work, as I was sort of finding my feet in dispute world. I was trying to hand the work over to sort of QS, and then it was sort of, I thought, well, okay, well, let's see how can we make this work. So that's what we started doing in that year-long courtship. I liken it to a marriage in some ways, so there's a bit of luck, and there's a bit of actually working out whether you're going to work okay with each other. And I think what we found that we'd sort of known a bit socially. We seem to have the same principles. I said to Johnny, look, if you want this to work, you've got to make it work, and you need to bring some work with you. And so that was probably an element of that. Okay. And Johnny was at sort of a crossroads, because I think he offered partnership at the firm that he was at, like equity partnership, but didn't necessarily think that was where he wanted to go. So it was, okay, well, let's see how we work. So I think it was that sort of long meeting, trying to work out whether you could work with each other. And then it was like, okay, we've got work here now. Let's go with it, and we'll see how it sort of pans out. And I think you never really know until you start working with each other. And I think the one thing that I've found and I've reflected on is that although we've got the same principles, we don't necessarily want to do the same things. And so Johnny does the bits that I don't necessarily get off on, and vice versa. And I think also in terms of our attitude to risk and things like that, we're a bit different. And I think when I thought about this, I thought probably the best people to ask are Teresa and Helen, who are wives, and they both say, and Helen says, well, Johnny's me and Teresa's you, in terms of the personalities. And there's a yeah, I mean, I'll let you sort of work out which is which, but there is that sort of, actually it is in some ways like a marriage, but and like I say, a bit of good fortune, and just the fact that we're not both wanting to do the same thing. We're not both wanting to be sort of like at the front of the shop window all the time. One of us say happy to defer to the other, and so I think that's, it's just that trying to work out whether things can work. I think if two people want to do the same thing, it's not going to work, because they're going to be competing against each other, and I don't feel that we've ever had that. And as I say, it's just now it's just we're not the same people, but we enjoy the same things, but not necessarily want to do the same things.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think Stuart and I see the similar, there's different skill sets in each of us, but the principles of how we want to run our business are the same, and that's what helps it work. Johnny, you've been around a while, so what are the biggest challenges you've seen over the years in construction dispute resolution?
Well, I mean, I think certainly from an adjudication perspective, I think increased use of lawyers and experts. It's got much more, lots more people taking advice as opposed to running adjudications themselves, which I don't think is a bad thing. I think it's a good thing, and I think it's very much added to the process. So, but it's not just about adjudication. I think processes like mediation, for example. It's being increasingly used, and that will only get more and more due to the recent case law and as such having to use ADR processes. As well as that, I think a desire and understanding from those in the industry that disputes can be very costly and how to avoid them. So not just processes like mediation, but things like conflict avoidance has grown massively. I mean, the conflict avoidance conference that was put on in Westminster in October was a sellout. And lots of people there, and major employers who are interested in understanding how these other processes can work. So, and I think it's realizing that, you know, one size doesn't fit all on projects. You know, early resolution of the issues and using things like conflict avoidance procedures. I'm doing something at the moment called a facilitated discussion, where I'm in there with the parties, having discussions and trying to resolve things before they escalate into a dispute. So it's those sorts of things I think have changed, Annie. As I say, not just adjudication, but other processes as well.
So moving on to the book, because that's the reason you're here. Fairly straightforward, 12 chapters, taking adjudication chronologically, but it runs to over 215 pages. So it's quite a chunky book. What led to the decision to write it? How hard was it to put together?
Is that shall I go first? Well,
Yeah.
Interestingly, I can tell you when we decided to write it, Annie, and that was sat on a train to the Leeds Society Construction Law Conference in March 2020. And we came up with the idea of writing a book as such, because to mark the 25th anniversary of MCMS, which was going to be the following year. And we thought, that's fine, easy. We'll you know, we're just writing about what we do. You know, we'll have done it in a couple of months, not a problem. We suffered from some critical delays, unfortunately. But we're glad that we managed to get it published before the 30th anniversary of MCMS. But really, in terms of the process, I think the actual writing process wasn't that hard. Once we sat down and worked out what, you know, such as chapter structure, you write the contents page first. And okay, well, what do you want in the book? And then, okay, well, what do we want in those chapters? And then we went through and wrote it. Now, that part wasn't difficult. The editing process, we had great publishers, London Publishing Partnership. Can't recommend them highly enough if anyone is wanting to write a book. But the editing process, after about the 5th or 6th time you've read the book, you're like, oh no, you just I don't want to read it again. So consequently, after it's sort of published, people are coming up and going, right, you know, on page so and so, you say this. It's like, okay. No. So I mean, I think we're both immensely proud. I think if you'd have said to us, you know, as you know, graduates coming out of university one day, will you write a book? We'd probably say about unlikely. No, we're immensely proud, and I think we're just pleased that it's been quite well received, and people have had good feedback to say about it and said that they found it a helpful read. So yeah, that was, so in a long-winded way, Annie, that was how it got put together.
Matt, do you want to share from your side?
Yeah. I mean, I think, you know, life got in the way initially. It was always something we wanted to do, and I think that the real kick for us was when the blog that we did with Thomson Reuters, they took a strategic decision to stop their blogs, and then it was like, okay, let's and they'd also said, we're happy for you to run the blog yourselves. We weren't quite ready for that, so we thought, well, okay, we'll take the opportunity to write, and that really. We set ourselves a target to get it done by the end of the calendar year last year. That didn't happen. But the actual, once we'd actually committed time and put time into the diary to do it, it flowed quite well. So we had a system. It worked, from the start to the finish. I think we did shift the how to become an adjudicator book. The publishers suggested that would work better as an appendix rather than a sort of, cradle to grave sort of chronology. But yeah, no, that worked. But yeah, the editing was the indexing. Bless her, Cassie. Who came on board about the time where we were sort of talking about launching the blog, we thought, what a great idea for you to work out what we do by reading the book and doing the index. And I'm not sure I think she eventually was. I'd like to think she was proud, but I certainly she could sense some frustration at what a painful process it was. But yeah, I think I only read the book from start to finish on the 7th edit, because I drew that short straw. I think I had 6 hours waiting for a next flight. And I read it, and yeah, it was a bit like, oh, did we write that? Oh, right, okay. And same as Johnny, really proud, but then it's almost like, okay, now move on to the next thing. But yeah, it's just glad that we've got something out there that hopefully is going to be useful for people that are wanting to adjudicate, really. And I think it does what it intended to do.
Brilliant. Thank you. Okay, so obviously it's a big book as far as, well, it's not as big as say Julian Bailey's work, but it's getting there. So from the entire book, we can't obviously go into huge amounts of detail in the next 20 minutes or so, but let's pick out a few points that might be interesting. So Matt, something around quality of adjudication. Do you think the quality of the adjudication has improved over the years, and is it the book's intention to help improve that quality?
Yeah, I mean, there was, I suppose, thinking back at the outset of UK adjudication, the pool of adjudicators was taken from people who'd done some arbitration training and then go off on a weekend course. And there was an uncertainty as to how adjudication was going to roll out. And I think what transpired, and particularly after the sort of the TCC or the official referees, I think, at first enforcement case, once they put their weight behind it, and the courts adopted a very sort of a wide approach in terms of what you could adjudicate, when you could adjudicate in the UK, that added a level of complexity that required, I think, probably more than a weekend course. And also, one of the things it did was, I think, killed off domestic arbitration. That's a bit dramatic because there still is arbitration out there, but not much. So that pool of new practitioners who are going to be the people who'd learned about case management, writing a decision or an award, etc., weren't necessarily there. So I think what you saw, the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators, the RICS, they said, well, okay, we need to now think about new training. And I can remember, I think I was involved with Franco Mastrandrea, Eric Mauser, and we, with the RICS, and I think the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators, were doing similar things. So, well, okay, actually, we need to come up with a course that's suited for adjudication. It was very much modelled on arbitration training, but there were sort of some differences in terms of the time pressures and some of the sort of jurisdictional challenges that I don't recall being so prevalent in the arbitration world. So I think you had much more of it was more typical to have a reluctant participant in adjudication, and that, I think, creates a certain difficulty. So I think in terms of the quality of adjudication, I think the training has got more specific and thorough. I think it's still variable. I think there are certain people who have developed a huge amount of experience, and I think those people, providing they're not getting complacent, have improved. And I think, just on a personal note, there's no doubt that I believe that I'm better equipped now than I was 25 years ago. I think also those people passing on their knowledge to either pupils or mentees will hopefully help improve the quality. And the book was very much in that sort of space. It was effectively the book that you'd need for the case management and the decision writing part of the courses that you might do in a diploma or a postgraduate diploma or the postgraduate course, like there's LLMs and MScs in construction law and dispute resolution that have adjudication modules. So it's very much that's the sort of the aim, to hopefully mean that the people are going to be quite well equipped, because I think at the beginning it was very much, we don't know what this process is. I think the other thing is looking at the internationalization of adjudication and some of the training that I was asked to do in sort of different jurisdictions. It was a bit daunting at first, because I thought, well, I need to read all this legislation, but actually we chatted and said, well, hang about, the principles are the same. It's about procedural fairness, making a decision based on a dispute and marshalling all the evidence and the legal submissions. That's similar no matter what model you have. And so that gave us more confidence to say, actually, this book could work. But we recognise that the UK is a pretty unique place in terms of adjudication because of the role that the TCC plays. And I don't think there's any, apart from, I think it might be Abu Dhabi, who's just introduced a sort of construction course. There's no other specialist construction court that is there to support the industry, and I think that makes the England and Wales UK model very, very different to the rest of the world. So, but the actual principles of managing the process in a fair way, reaching the decision, it's the same. It's just that you may have different challenges.
Yeah. I think the quality of adjudication is such a big topic, and I know we've got it tabled as one of the sessions we're going to hold a whole session on in the first part of the new year. So we'll have lots to talk about on it then. You just mentioned there different jurisdictions. Do we think there are some countries doing adjudication better than others when we look outside the UK?
I was thinking about that, and I might be biased, but I like the Irish model. And that's not just because we're going to Ireland tomorrow or the day after, but I think they seem to have got that balance right. So they refer to payment disputes, but they adopt quite a broad definition of a payment dispute, and so there has to be money at stake rather than a pure declaration. And I know that UK, you can just do anything. And I just wonder sometimes if it is just a declaration you're looking for, and if you look at the interaction with Part 8 in England and Wales, I'm thinking, well, maybe actually a judge might be better in the TCC getting on quick to give you a final answer. Maybe that's better. So I hesitate to say I think maybe the England and Wales is too wide. But it does create certain difficulties, and some of the sort of you see the sort of the costs and things that are involved. It can be quite prohibitive because of how complex the process has come. In contrast to some of the narrower jurisdictions like Australia, where you can only sometimes you can only go upline. You can't run new arguments, or if you've got if you haven't set out the reason why you're not paying in a payment schedule, you can't then challenge or run the particular argument. And I think that's probably a step too far the other way. And then there's, I think, other jurisdictions where there's an issue on the appointing authorities, where you get people appointing themselves, not necessarily the same degree of regulation or scrutiny from the courts. Whereas I think in Ireland, I think they've got a happy balance. They've got 100% enforcement rate as well. So I personally think, and I think Ireland is closer to than England, Wales than Australia. I think they've got the balance right. But like I say, I may well be biased.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so Jonathan, on the concept of the quasi-judicial role of adjudicators, knowing your roles in training and mentoring adjudicators, what characteristics would you say make a good adjudicator? Is it knowing how many lawyers there are on the call? How many do you think a lawyers are better an adjudicator than a QS, for example? Is there any type of person or type of professional that makes a better adjudicator?
And I think in terms of professional background, Stuart, no, I think it really does depend. It depends on the facts of the case. If it's purely about the value of variations, and it is all quantum, then I think a QS naturally would probably be better. If it's a complex area of law and declarations, then you know, I think a lawyer. So in terms of professional background, I do think it depends on the nature of the dispute. However, in terms of sort of personal traits, I think that we can look at those, and there are certain those that apply across the board. And first and foremost, it sounds obvious, doesn't it? But you've got to be able to make a decision. And if you can't make a decision, if you're you know, someone who struggles with that, because you know, they you know, dither away, that is not a helpful personal trait when you have a limited amount of time in which to come to a firm conclusion and answer the questions that have been asked for you. So number one, the ability to make a decision. I think you've got to be organized. You know, it is a time sensitive process, and you've got to organize and make sure that, you know, the parties are quite clear on when they're making submissions, the ability to deal with those in terms of late submissions or anything like that, but also allocating your own time to write the decision. Because, you know, it's really important to set that time aside. And there's no point, you know, the day before the decision's due going, oh yeah, I haven't started that yet. Oh God, what am I, you know, that simply won't work. So making sure, you know, someone that is organized and good at managing time, the right temperament as well. I think there's very often, and we all get it in our working lives, an email comes in and you look at it and if you think, well, if I responded to that and what I'm actually thinking, I probably would be out of a job. So it's that right temperament. It's that sitting back and going, right, okay, yeah, I might think that's a bit daft, but I'm not going to actually say that. And so it's keeping your cool and not taking the bait, not entering the arena, as so to speak, if there is an aggressive party. So you've got to have quite a cool temperament. But another, I think, a really important trait, and we mentioned it a few times in the book, is a thick skin, because one, you know, we're writing decisions, and I think the losing party needs to understand why they've lost, and that's all well and good. But despite the fact they understand why they've lost, they might still be upset about that. So they might make their feelings known. On the odd occasion, there might be a complaint. We've seen, you know, unlike in Ireland, you know, in the UK, there's been, you know, some decisions enforced, but others not, and some adjudicators criticised. And it's the ability to deal with those sorts of things. So a thick skin is an important trait. So I think for me, those are some of the most important characteristics. or qualities. I don't know if Matt's got anything to add to that list.
Yeah, I think the ability to work under pressure. So
Yeah.
And sort of that swan-like sort of persona, if you can develop that. And I think, and the realization that you don't necessarily, the time pressure is something that can, you know, if you can't cope with that and keep calm, then you're probably not the right place. I certainly have seen, I've had over 60 pupils now, and it's great, a great experience, I think, for both. But certain people can't make decisions and really struggle, and I don't hear from them for months because they just can't make that decision. They get to the end of the process, and I know some of it might be just because work gets in the way, but some people just really struggle and say, "Oh, this is really quite hard." We haven't got that luxury, so
yeah.
Okay, Annie, I think if you want to press on with the next question that you got.
So one of the things that we hear people say about adjudication is that it's being used for the wrong type of dispute. So as disputes are becoming more complex, and we're hearing about arbitrations for huge sums of money, perhaps moving away from what it was initially designed to be. What are your feelings?
I think you see, I think Matt and I probably maybe differ here. Matt was talking, earlier on about the Irishes and the payment disputes. I don't. I quite like the simplicity of the UK's referring any dispute, and just sort of picking up on the other models briefly around the world. I mean, obviously, Matt talked about Ireland. We've got the Australian models, Hong Kong as well. They're just about to introduce adjudication. They've taken a position sort of somewhere in between. It's very prescriptive. When I tell you their security payment bill is 90 pages long, you can sort of see how prescriptive that is. But I do like the simplicity of the UK's. You can refer any dispute. I think I totally agree with Matt that one of the reasons it works well in the UK is that we've got the TCC. But if I give you an example, say you just want a declaration on what an extension of time entitlement is. Now, it makes sense, I think, to refer that to a construction professional. But in the UK, that's probably one of the only jurisdictions where if there's no money involved, you can just go and get that declaration. I think New Zealand might be another one, isn't it, Matt, there? So I do like that. Now, in terms of the wrong type of disputes, Annie, sorry, I went off on a bit of a tangent there, but in terms of wrong type of disputes, one of the ones that's often picked up on are things like professional negligence. It's not suitable professional negligence. Yet, we do see it used for those disputes. And I think the industry has said, okay, well, yes, it's not, we keep on, hearing adjudication is, it's different. It's not what was intended originally. Yeah, that's exactly right. However, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think the industry has picked it up and has run with it and likes certain characteristics and likes applying them to larger disputes that weren't maybe necessarily always anticipated, like the professional negligence ones. I think they like, yes, you can't recover your own costs, but you're not going to be at risk for the other party's costs. They like that. They like the fact that they can have another bite of the cherry afterwards. Rarely happens, but they have got their opportunity there, so they've always got that knowledge in the background. So I think that yes, at times it probably you could look at some of these disputes, Annie, and say yes, that maybe have been better off in litigation or arbitration, but to the same extent, I think the industry has said, no, actually, sometimes, we do want to use adjudication for those types of disputes for the reasons I've just explained. So, as I say, I appreciate I'm in the minority because there's a lot of people who say, oh, no, shouldn't be used for those. But those are my feelings on it.
And our final, just before we go to our final question, we've got some in the chat, so I'd like to move on to those. So if you do have a question, do put it in the chat, and we'll hopefully get around to asking Matt and Jonathan a couple of those. Matt, one of the things that came up when we was planning this session, we was on a call, and was the impact on mental health for adjudicators and everyone involved in the party. And in fact, last week I was at a similar talk during arbitration week on a similar topic in terms of arbitration and how much of an impact it can have on those involved in the dispute resolution process. Particularly Joe said sometimes parties are not happy with your answer and you might get aggressive responses or communications. How do you deal with that and how do you protect yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the thick skin is sort of one thing that Johnny's already spoke to. I think it's just having an awareness of the pressures that people might be under, and also realizing that, they might be aimed at you, but I think in the majority of times it's not necessarily aimed at you. I was asked to take part. It was cancelled because of a train strike, but TEXA were their adjudication conference. Have got a session called Rehumanizing Adjudication, and that was in response to concerns on the conduct of party representatives and their behaviour. And I think, and as part of that, I went to speak to certain lawyers and some consultants to say, what are you seeing? And some of the behaviours that you got were, in my view, were quite shocking. And I thought, well, okay, well, what can we do as adjudicators? And the response was a bit depressing in some ways, because it said, well, you probably can't do much. You know, you can't. You might be able to say that I think that's, you know, that's inappropriate language or whatever when it's directed against each other. But there was a sort of, and I think it probably comes from the nature of litigators or people who are advancing cases. They're competitive people. They've been competitive in their careers, and they want to win. And I think sometimes, and I spoke to my daughter who's studying clinical psychology. She said the biological reaction to stress is to deal with whatever fire that's closest to you, and you just don't necessarily give thought to what's happening around you, and you just respond biologically to the person who at the moment is going to get 100% of your attention, and that might be misdirected. So I think I don't know the answers. I think for me it's a case of when you get that sort of email that tells you that you're mad, you're bonkers, you must correct your decision. It's like you have to think, right, okay, we don't know what's going on. And some of the emails that I've had, you know, late at night, I think, is that drink fueled or is that stress fueled? It might be a combination of both. And sometimes it's just like, okay, try not to take it to heart, but sometimes you do. You just sort of think, okay, well, you know, and not being sort of overly dramatic, but there might be something happening in that person's, personal space that causes them to do that. What can you do about it? I think perhaps I would, if there was somebody in a particular firm and I knew somebody more senior, I might actually have that sort of, is everything okay with somebody? But it's quite difficult because we do have to keep our distance as adjudicators. I think a lot of it, perhaps is maybe we can help by just raising awareness and encouraging civility. But there's that sort of, even the person who's responding feels that they don't necessarily going to make an issue of it, and they'll maybe just, you know, punch first and ask a question later, and it's sort of, you end up with this sort of combative exchanges, and that sometimes it's it can become tiresome, but it's a case of when do you step in? Probably as difficult, well, not difficult, probably the most sort of involved I might get is say this isn't helping, and that's it really, because you don't want to be seen as losing your cool. Mm-hmm. Because the judge may take that as the fact that you're displaying some kind of bias.
A tricky one, definitely. We've got a few questions in the chat, so I'm gonna put some of these to you in the last few minutes we've got left. The first one is, what would you say to someone who's interested in dispute resolution and perhaps become an adjudicator but lacks the confidence? Johnny, do you want to take that one?
Oh, I lacks the confidence. I wouldn't be put off by that. I think by doing courses like, for example, the RICS diploma in adjudication, you will meet lots of other people who are setting off on that process. And I think simply doing qualifications like that, learning the knowledge, gives you confidence. And we, Matt and I are exactly the same. We all had to do our first one, and we all have to find our feet. So I think it's the qualifications, and not just things like the diploma, going and, attending adjudication society events, society construction law events, and things like that. But in addition to that, once you've got those qualifications, then undertaking some mentoring. So with the, as Matt mentioned, we mentor pupils, and they will shadow us generally on 3 adjudications. They'll follow us in the process. They'll write the decisions. That's an amazing way of building confidence, because they get the ability to do what we're doing and write decisions. And there's, what we do after, a week or so after we've issued our own, we'll exchange decisions, we'll go over them with our pupils, and then then we'll give them feedback. And it's really interesting to see the different answers sometimes. So sometimes it's the same, but sometimes it's different. So I think the things like the qualification, the mentoring, that sort of support is really, really helpful for anyone who feels like they lack confidence. But, you know, seriously, we've all been there. We all started at that point.
The other thing, just building on that, just quickly, is that there are certain people who don't know how good they are.
Yeah,
I think I read Sheryl Sandberg in Leaning In. She talked about the typical female sort of personality that needs to be 80% confident they can do something before they put themselves forward, whereas the male, it might be nearer 20-30%. And I think sometimes, and I've certainly found it, some really good people, they just don't realize how good they are. And I think that goes through all walks of life, whether you're a parent or a coach. You see certain people and they just need that reassurance, and then it's the stabilizers gradually come off, they turn around, mummy and daddy aren't behind them, and they realize they're riding the bike. And I think there's just an element of, you know, keeping people on, you know, giving them that hand when they need it, but then also being there. You know, I had a call this week, what do I do? I've got this issue, should I resign? And it's sort of, no, I think, you know, try this and come back. And they said, yeah, fine. They don't ask the next time because they know.
And that's, I guess, the kind of throwing yourself into this world is going to help you have that pool of contacts you can call and ask for advice from and stuff. This question, I think, is probably what everyone on here as a party rep wants to know. How do we win adjudications? As quickly as you can.
Yeah, if you've got a really difficult, complex case that needs someone to spend the time, go to Jonathan. But then we cover all bases. So if you've got, but no, I'm tongue in cheek. I'll let Jonathan go.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are ways you can help your adjudicator, and if you're helping your adjudicator, I think that's you know, really important. It won't necessarily mean you're successful, but I think that things like trying to be collaborative, that's helpful for us as the adjudicator. It doesn't always have to be locking horns. If the adjudicator says, right, you know, go away and try and agree a timetable that's mutually convenient, then do so. Avoiding being aggressive, those sorts of things. So I think about those ways that you can help the adjudicator, and I think that that can do no harm, if you see what I mean, Annie, but also get things like good advice. So that might be legal advice, because they can add, you know, the solicitors and counsel and claims consultants as well can add value to the process, but equally getting good advice on the technical side of things. I mean, Matt and I will both tell you, we've done adjudications where the law has been brilliant, you know, that parties won on the law, hands down. However, then you get to something like the quantum and they've just gone, oh, well, we'll forget about that. Don't worry about the quantum. But actually, then they fall down on that. So ultimately, there's no point in winning on the law and losing when it comes to the money. So think about that in terms of getting advice, and it might be in-house, on the quantum, on your records, your evidence, you know, the importance of records. I try to get that in every talk I do about the importance of records. And there was a lovely piece, a book on the ICE contracts written by a chap called Max Abrahamson, and he talks about parties to an arbitration will learn three things: the importance of records, the importance of records, and the importance of records. And I think that is absolutely key. And having that evidence and thinking about it and second guessing what the other side are going to say and say, okay, well, we're going to second guess that, and this is going to be our response, and don't ignore those points. Because if you think, oh, we won't respond to that, the adjudicator might not notice it, or we will, and we'll notice the fact that you haven't responded to it. So, you know, think about those sorts of things, really.
And another question we've got is, do you think you need to be in London to have a career in dispute resolution?
Well, I did no, not now, not in the modern world. I think being in the dispute resolution space and having those contacts. So if you've got membership of the Society of Construction Law or Chartered Institute of Arbitrators, the Adjudication Society, attending those events either online or in person, then I don't think so. That said, I think we are based in London. We did have regional offices in Leeds and Birmingham, and we then went away from that, probably because we realised that we didn't necessarily need to be in those regions for what we do. So I think in remote working now and increasing use of online submissions, then I don't think you necessarily need to be in the city. That said, I still think there's a real benefit of being around or in the same building as people. And I certainly hadn't appreciated how much I enjoyed that until we had the pandemic. So whilst it was great for work because you just worked because there was nothing else to do, I think going to meet people now, I think, and just being in an office and learning off people is helpful. So if you're a sole practitioner and you're working for your own, I think it can be difficult. But I think if you can try and build up that network and go to events, I think it doesn't really matter where you are.
And then the final question we've got is, are there plans for a second book?
Should we tell them?
Yeah.
No, there is. We're not going to tell you exactly because we're still sort of working through the content, but yeah, and that's I think that's Cassie's fault. Cassie said when she announced, and it was fun watching it as she was doing the countdown to the book launch, but she kept on saying, "This is Jonathan and Matt's inaugural book." And I thought, well, that's a bit pressure, but actually, it was quite enjoyable. So we are certainly looking at. And we have got ideas. We're trying to work on a title. So, but yeah, I think we know the content. But so we are.
Well, I'm glad to hear that the experience of writing this one didn't put you off. That's
no, exactly that.
I think.
Can I just
go on? Yeah.
Sorry, Annie. I just saw a specific question for me in relation to an series of 11 adjudications. So I didn't want to. So I think all I would say, so the question is that do you think that's a bad thing? You had 11 serious adjudications. Actually, they were picking off individual items of the final account in 10 adjudications. Although it took 3 years for those 11 adjudications, it wasn't 3 years full on. The theory was that by the time we got to number 11, which was the final account, a lot of the issues have been decided. So actually, it was quite a good way. It might not have felt for the responding party that it was a good way to deal with it, but they were picking off issues on the way, and that may have promoted a phone call. So I don't necessarily think serial adjudications is a bad thing, and I think in some ways it might be better than the old kitchen sink. So sorry for just I saw that specific question. I just wanted to address that.
But yeah, I think that's all we've got time for. Thank you so much, Jonathan and Matt. And if people want a copy of the book, where can they get it?
Well, there's the London Publishing Partnership themselves are still selling it. They can also buy it through Amazon. Wiley's Bookshop, the legal bookshop in London, which is in the actual physical stores in Lincoln's Inn, but that they do also sell online. We also have an ebook as well, which is available at, I think, Wiley's as well, isn't it, Matt? As well as
Wiley's do one, and Amazon certainly got an ebook as well. So
Waterstones.
Yeah. I mean, what I would say is that the ebook, I think, is useful. The schedules and the appendices don't work so well in the electronic edition. And I think I would say that, wouldn't I? But I think a hard copy and an electronic is probably the best. You can have that. But yeah, so.
Yeah, good.
Brilliant. And we'll be back again next month. Next month, we're going to be looking at how to win business internationally. So that will be an interesting session, and details of that will be up on the website in the next day or two. That's all from me. Stuart, anything from your side?
No, thank you very much. Thanks both for joining us. Thanks for everyone for tuning in for the construction law equivalent of breakfast with Naga and Charlie.
Well, thank you,
Stuart and Annie.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.